Hey, I think we're live, and it's been about a week or so since I last uploaded a video. Like I said, I'm probably gonna scale down the frequency of videos now that the Quran project is complete. And there were a couple of things I didn't really get to. There were a few points I didn't emphasize, and I only thought about them afterwards, after it was finished. But there are so many distinctions that could be made between Islam and worshiping God that, um, if I really wanted to, I could do this series for the rest of my channel. But I wasn't interested in that. But I thought I would present the layman's case for analysis of this religion, why it's a false religion. But there are a lot of things I didn't. For example, there if you go to Numbers chapter 27, there's hi Miss Bluebird. Good morning. Numbers 27, there's the request of Zelophehad's daughters, and this is a really good example of the difference between Islam and worshiping God. They wanted an inheritance, and they didn't want. So in verse 3 it says, "Our father died in the wilderness, and he was not in the company of them that gathered themselves together against the Lord in the company of Korah, but died in his own sin and had no sons." And it continues, "Why should the name of our father be done away from among his family? Because he hath no son. Give unto us therefore a possession among the brethren of our father." And Moses brought their cause before the Lord. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, "The daughters of Zelophehad speak right. Thou shalt surely give them a possession of an inheritance among their father's brethren, and thou shalt cause the inheritance of their father to pass unto them. And thou shalt speak unto the children of Israel, saying that if a man die and have no son, then ye shall cause his inheritance to pass unto his daughter." Hi, Mary Alex. And this is a great example illustrating the difference between Allah and the God of the Bible. In the Quran, of course, women are basically shadow. They don't have any rights, and they certainly don't have inheritance rights. And I went through the Quran, the basically half a page where it deals with inheritance, and I contrasted that with the Bible, particularly Jesus, when he's in the book of Luke, when he's accosted by this man who wants him to divide his inheritance, to basically serve as an executor of his will. And his response is, "What, uh, am I a divider over you?" So there's that, but there's also the idea that in the Quran, women are treated like property, and this idea that they'll inherit anything is scoffed at. And there's also the uh, the idea that the idea of blood money and honor killings. This is something that's intrinsic to Islam, and you discover why once you actually read the Quran. And if you contrast this with um, the Bible, particularly the Pentateuch, when Moses talks about these cities of refuge, and there are so many counterexamples. But again, these are just some things that I could have explored, but I didn't want to make this series endless. You could talk about Islam all day, and there are channels that are devoted to Christian apologetics that focus exclusively on Islam. I just wanted to give you a general idea, give you the layman's argument for the difference between God and Allah and explain why Muslims and Christians don't worship the same God and show you why the God of the Quran is a counterfeit and Muhammad was a counterfeit prophet. But there are a lot of things that I could have gone into in more detail. Hi, GW. But today I just wanted to make a short video about COVID-19. Now, obviously, I'm not an epidemiologist, so I can't really contribute anything useful uh, scientifically, but I just want to talk about the reaction, the the reaction, particularly among certain people. Hi, Love and Light. Is there anyone else there? The reaction among certain people, uh, specifically Trump critics, and I wanted to highlight the intellectual inconsistency. Now, Trump's response to the outbreak of the coronavirus in the United States is it might be deficient. I'm not sure that random people on the internet will actually be able to perceive that immediately. Maybe we'll know if it's could very well be uh, short-sighted, but you wouldn't know that for months. But I think it's just generally a bizarre reaction to say that to attack Trump for his supposed shortcomings in containing the coronavirus to the extent that he can, and at the same time be in favor of welcoming scores of refugees and migrants from third world countries that haven't been haven't undergone any sort of testing and probably have potentially lethal communicable diseases. To say that it's hard to reconcile these two positions, to say that you should, and I bring this up because someone on Twitter the other day criticized Ann Coulter for the fact that she brought up President Obama not stopping flights during the Ebola outbreak in Sierra Leone and Liberia and Guinea, the three West African countries that saw an enormous outbreak of Ebola several years ago. And this writer criticized Ann Coulter for bringing this up, and he mentioned the fact that there weren't any fatal Ebola diagnoses in the United States, and it's a weird way to look at this. The fact that this policy didn't lead to anyone dying, that's not really a good diagnostic tool for whether or not this was a good idea. The fact that it didn't result in any catastrophic outcome, that's not necessarily an indication that it was a good idea. But this raised the broader point of people who are attacking Trump and like I said, he might have completely mishandled this, but I'm not sure the random resistance Twitter accounts are the best people when it comes to analyzing whether or not he did. But this is something you'd probably know months from now whether or not this really was completely botched. But I think it's intellectually dishonest to say, attack Trump for his handling of this, and at the same time say we're just going to have open borders, people from countries that are teeming with communicable diseases that we can't diagnose and that we haven't vetted yet. We should still welcome these people, even though they're complete strangers. Forget the threat they might pose, particularly the refugees coming in from Syria. it's already acknowledged by most honest people that there are jihadists probably being sent into Europe by Turkey as a sort of revenge on Europe and the United States for not backing Turkey in its fruitless quest to recreate the Sultanate. Erdogan's attempt to just insert himself into every country in the Middle East and expand Turkey's borders. But it's just a weird to try to claim that these two positions are intellectually consistent. That Trump is just lackadaisical and he's not doing enough to combat the spread of COVID-19, and then at the same time say, well, we should just open up our borders and let whoever and let people from China and and Iran come here and potentially infect who knows how many people. To me, it's just it doesn't make much sense. I don't think you can reconcile these two positions intellectually. This idea that Trump is fouling up and he's not doing enough to combat this virus, and at the same time, we should just open up our borders and allow anyone to come into the United States. It's kind of an absurd stance when you actually break it down. And this came up during the Bernie Sanders town hall when one of the Fox news anchors asked him if there was a potential threat from people who had COVID-19. Would he consider shutting down the borders? And he was just his response was no, of course not, because he's just an open borders fanatic and he wants to pander to the people who he perceives to be his new constituency, even though his campaign is completely flailing. This won't help him win the nomination yet, but he still has to abide by this dogma, which makes no sense. So he said, no, of course not. And of course, Sanders is one of the same people like Schumer and all of these other fraudulent politicians who's attacking Trump. Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that. The Epoch Times is probably one of the best newspapers in terms of investigative reporting. I know a lot of people bring up the fact that its ownership is tied to Falun Gong, but I don't think that's. I don't think that. I think that's just used as a way to delegitimize their journalism and the fact that they're much better at it than most mainstream. You can see it's hard to avoid touching your face, but it's just used as a way to a delegitimize reporters who are actually doing their job, unlike all of these other this other Potemkin journalism, like the Wall Street Journal, which is basically just kowtowing and genuflecting to the Chinese communists, and they're putting out press releases for the government in the country that actually began this global pandemic. So a lot of people attack the Epoch Times because of the owners and their beliefs, but if you put that aside, it's actually a really great newspaper, especially on China. They probably have better reporting on China and the Chinese Communist Party than almost any newspaper or journal that I can think of. And even domestic politics, they're really good at. Uh, the the Epoch Times, they probably have the best commercials, the web ads. You can actually watch these 4-minute web advertisements for them and not have to click through. Um, yeah, that's another thing. The whole idea of these migrants the, there's no I, idea of quarantining. You have northern Italy now, almost half of the country is basically in lockdown, and now the entire country. I don't know if you saw pictures of Rome, but there are these pictures of people, tourists going in Rome, and they show themselves, uh, the Colosseum in the background, or the Vatican, and there's basically no one else in the photo. These spots where thousands of tourists usually gather, and another problem is you can't quarantine these. I mean, this is another video, but what Turkey's doing now, they're basically trying to invade Greece and trying to restart the Greco-Turkish war. It's just really, uh, yeah, um, it's just really a really bad situation. Um, but yeah, and I talked about this in another video, how Iran has actually spread the coronavirus to virtually every country in the Middle East, with the exception, I think, of Saudi Arabia, and that's probably because Saudi Arabia has been trying to isolate Iran for the past decade or so. Their mortal enemies, the Shia and the Wahhabis. So, um, but yeah, I just wanted to make a short video about that. Thanks everyone for watching the Islam series. Definitely, like I said, if definitely try to share the videos. I've shared it with people who are interested in this subject, and I might come back to Islam, but I think I'm taking a temporary break from that. I'm kind of Islamed out. Anyway, thanks everyone for joining me on this morning stream, and I will see you next time.